The first time I saw Sarah Donahue, she was dragging a battered trunk through February mud, bruises flowering beneath her jaw where her scarf had slipped. I almost rode past. Another desperate soul wasn't my concern. The Dakota Territory swallowed people whole every winter, especially women foolish enough to travel alone. "I don't hire women," I called from my saddle. A half Lakota rancher with enough troubles without inviting more. Her eyes met mine, storm gray and unflinching. "I'm not seeking employment, Mr. Blackwood," she said, my name on her lips a surprise that stopped me cold. "Just water and temporary shelter." I should have pointed her toward town, 10 miles south. Instead, I dismounted, the old war wound in my side complaining. Something in how she stood, spine straight despite obvious exhaustion, reminded me of my Lakota mother before my father's fists taught her to bend. I didn't know then that this woman would upend my carefully constructed solitude, or that the man hunting her would bring a reckoning that would force us both to finally stop running. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. I never meant to be anyone's salvation. The wind cut like a knife off the Black Hills when I first spotted her, a slip of a woman dragging a battered trunk through the mud outside my ranch gate, her blue dress torn at the hem. February in Dakota Territory ain't no place for the unprepared. And she looked about as prepared as a sparrow in a blizzard. "I don't hire women," I called from atop thunder, my voice rasping through my throat, still raw from last night's whiskey. The bay stomped beneath me, sensing my discomfort at this intrusion into our solitude. She didn't flinch, just looked up with eyes that reminded me of storm clouds, gray and full of trouble brewing. "I'm not seeking employment, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady despite her shivering. "Just water and temporary shelter." I narrowed my eyes, hand instinctively moving to the rifle in my saddle holster. "How do you know my name?" "Your reputation precedes you." She straightened her spine, dignity somehow intact despite her circumstances. "I'm Sarah Donahue." The name meant nothing to me, just another drifter. I figured, though women rarely wandered these parts alone, something about her posture, proud despite obvious exhaustion, kept me from riding away. That, and the glimpse of bruising along her jawline, poorly hidden beneath a woolen scarf. I dismounted with a grunt, my old war injury complaining, 6 years since Gettysburg, and that rebel bullet still had opinions about sudden movements. Up close, I could see she was young, maybe 25, with a face that might have been pretty before hardship had carved its lines. "I've got nowhere else to go tonight," she added, not begging, just stating facts. "I can pay." She held up $3 silver that caught the dying sunlight. "Keep your money," I muttered, glancing toward the bunkhouse. "There's a lean-to behind the barn. It ain't much, but it'll keep the wolves away, the four-legged kind, at least." She nodded once, dignified despite her circumstances. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I warned, taking Thunder's reins. "I expect you gone by morning." I led her to the lean-to, watching her struggle with that trunk. Pride stopped me from offering help, and something in her eyes told me she wouldn't accept it anyway. I fetched a blanket, not my newest, but not my worst either, and pointed out the well and outhouse before retreating to my cabin. That night, I cleaned my rifle by lamplight, wondering what kind of trouble followed this woman, my mother's people. The Lakota believed in signs and omens. A lone woman appearing out of nowhere, knowing my name, Nothing good could come of it. I poured another whiskey and decided Sarah Donahue was a problem for tomorrow. But morning came, and with it, surprise. I stepped onto my porch at dawn to find her already at work, sweeping away months of accumulated dirt and debris with a makeshift broom of bound twigs. "Thought you'd be gone," I said, voice still thick with sleep. She paused, a strand of dark hair falling across her forehead. "I have nowhere pressing to be, and your porch needed sweeping." I stared at her, this strange woman who'd invaded my solitude with her quiet determination. Something told me Sarah Donahue wasn't going anywhere soon, and that thought unsettled me more than I cared to admit. 3 days passed, and Sarah showed no signs of leaving. Each morning I'd wake expecting her gone, and each morning I'd find evidence of her presence: freshly gathered eggs, mended shirts appearing on my chair, the cabin swept clean for the first time in years. I didn't ask her to stay, but I stopped telling her to leave. That seemed agreement enough. On the 4th evening, I watched her transform my meager supplies, salt pork, dried beans, and the last of the winter potatoes, into a stew that actually had flavor. She'd found herbs dried and forgotten in my cupboard, dusty remnants of my mother's teachings that I'd kept but never used. "You can cook," I observed, the words awkward in my mouth. Conversation hadn't been necessary for years. "I've had to learn many things," she replied, her back to me as she worked. She wore one of my old shirts, sleeves rolled up, her dark hair pinned loosely at her nape. "Where'd you come from? Sarah Donahue?" The question had been burning in me, her hand stilled momentarily over the pot. "East Philadelphia originally. Long way from Philadelphia to nowhere. Dakota Territory. Yes, very long." She served the stew without elaboration, her movements precise, economical. We ate in silence. The only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the fireplace. I noticed how she held herself, straight-backed even when tired, eyes always checking doorways and windows, the posture of someone who'd learned to expect trouble. That night, I woke to the sound of muffled crying from the lean-to. I stood outside her door, hand raised to knock, then lowered it. Whatever ghosts haunted her weren't my concern, or so I told myself. The next morning, Hank Peterson rode in from town, his face grave beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Hank had been my only friend since I'd settled here after the war. The only man who didn't seem bothered by my half-Lakota heritage or my wartime reputation. "Trouble brewing. Hope," he said, declining to dismount. "There's men asking about a woman, offering good money for information." I felt Sarah's presence behind me before I heard her. "What kind of men?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Fancy type from back east, well-dressed, well-armed, led by some fellow calling himself James Rutherford. Says his wife's run off. Described her pretty close to your visitor there." He nodded toward Sarah. I didn't turn to look at her, but I felt her fear like a physical thing, pressing against my back. "Ain't seen no married women here," I said evenly. "Just a hired hand helping for the season." Hank's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "That's what I figured you'd say. Thought you should know they're offering $50 for information." That's a lot of money around these parts. After he rode away, I turned to find Sarah white-faced but standing straight. "He'll find me," she whispered. "He always does." "This Rutherford, he your husband?" She nodded, one hand unconsciously touching her bruised jaw. "He the one who did that to your face?" Another nod. "Why's he want you back so bad?" Her eyes met mine, hollow with a pain I recognized. Because I belong to him, or so the law says, and James Rutherford always keeps what belongs to him. Something cold settled in my gut. I'd seen enough violence in my life to recognize its shadow in others. "Well," I said finally, "law doesn't reach too far into these hills, and I don't much care for men who hit women." By early March, Sarah had transformed from unwelcome visitor to indispensable ally. Her hands were quick with needle and thread, sure with the chickens, steady even with Thunder, who typically tolerated only me. She never complained about the cold or the isolation, seemed content with our minimal conversation. I found her in the stable one morning, stroking Thunder's nose while he stood perfectly still, an unprecedented feat for my temperamental stallion. "Where'd you learn to handle horses?" I asked, leaning against the stall door. "My father raised Morgans in Virginia, before the war." Her voice carried no nostalgia. "After he died, my mother remarried. My stepfather had other ideas about a woman's proper place." "To James Rutherford?" She shook her head. "Rutherford came later, after my stepfather gambled away what remained of my father's estate and drank himself to death." "How'd you end up married to him?" Sarah's hands stilled on Thunder's flank. "My mother thought he was our salvation, a wealthy businessman willing to take on a widow and her daughter." Her laugh held no humor. "She died 3 months after the wedding." "Convenient timing. And you ran." "Not at first. I tried to be a good wife. For 3 years, I tried." Her eyes met mine, filled with a determination that reminded me of soldiers I'd known. "But when I found him beating our housekeeper's son, a boy of 12, for some imagined slight, I couldn't stay silent. That's when I learned what happens to wives who question their husbands." I felt the familiar heat of anger rising. "And no one stepped in?" "Who would? He owns half the businesses in Pittsburgh, contributes generously to the police fund, attends church every Sunday." Her voice was bitter. "Besides, the law is clear. A husband may discipline his wife as he sees fit." "That ain't discipline," I muttered. "That's cowardice." The word hung between us. I knew too well how society turned a blind eye to certain injustices, had felt it myself when shopkeepers refused to serve me because of my Lakota blood, when banks denied loans despite my Union service record. That evening, as snowflakes began to swirl outside our small window, Sarah sat mending my torn jacket by the fire. The domesticity of the scene struck me as both foreign and achingly familiar, reminiscent of childhood memories before my Lakota mother died and my white father took to the bottle. "Tell me about your mother," Sarah said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. "You mentioned she was Lakota." I stiffened, unused to speaking of my past. "Not much to tell. She died when I was 12. Consumption." "I'm sorry." Her needle continued its steady rhythm. "And your father?" "Fur trader. Drank himself to death after she passed." I poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "The Lakota took me in after. My mother's brothers. Raised me until I was old enough to join the Union Army. That couldn't have been easy, fighting for a government that—" She trailed off. "That systematically destroyed my mother's people?" I finished grimly. "No, it wasn't. But I had my reasons." "Yet you didn't join the resistance, like Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse." "I considered it, but more bloodshed." I shook my head. "Seemed there had to be another way. So I took what money I had, bought this land, and tried to live in between, not fully in either world." "Alone," Sarah added softly. "By choice," I countered. "As was I," she said, returning to her stitching, "until circumstances forced me to trust a stranger." The weight of her words hung between us. Acknowledgement of our unlikely alliance. Before I could respond, a sound outside froze us both, the distant but unmistakable crack of a branch breaking under weight. I extinguished the lamp immediately, moving silently to the window. In the moonlight reflecting off fresh snow, I caught the glint of metal, a rifle barrel. My hand found Sarah's arm in the darkness, fingers pressing a warning as I drew her away from the firelight. "How many?" she whispered. Barely audible. "At least 2. I breathed against her ear. "Back door. Now." We slipped through the narrow rear exit, the bitter cold hitting like a physical blow after the cabin's warmth. Crouching low, we made our way toward the small stable where our horses waited. A shot rang out, splintering wood near my head. Sarah stifled a cry as I pulled her down behind a woodpile. "Hope Blackwood return what's mine, and perhaps I'll let you live." James Rutherford had found us. "Stay here," I whispered to Sarah, pressing my pistol into her hands. "If anyone comes around that corner who isn't me, shoot." Her fingers closed around the weapon with surprising confidence. "Where are you going?" "To even the odds, moving like a shadow through the trees, as my Lakota uncles had taught me." I circled behind our attackers. There were 4 men, Rutherford himself, elegantly dressed despite the wilderness setting, and 3 hired guns positioned around the cabin. I took out the first man silently, a quick blow to the head with the butt of my rifle. He crumpled without a sound. I relieved him of his weapons before securing his hands and feet with his own belt. The second wasn't so easy. He turned just as I approached. Raising his gun with a shout, I lunged forward, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We went down together in the snow, his gun discharging harmlessly into the air. He fought viciously, landing a solid blow to my jaw before I managed to knock him unconscious with a rock. The shot had alerted the others. As I crouched behind a boulder, catching my breath, Rutherford's voice rang out, controlled but edged with fury. "Sarah, I know you can hear me. You've had your adventure, your childish rebellion. It's time to come home." From my position, I could see him clearly now, tall and distinguished in his expensive coat, silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. Beside him stood the 3rd gunman, rifle at the ready. "Think of your position," Rutherford continued, "your reputation. What will society say when they learn you've been living in sin with a half-breed savage?" I felt the familiar burn of those words, the dismissal I'd encountered all my life, but there was no time for old wounds. I needed to move before they found Sarah, or she did something reckless. The 3rd gunman began edging toward the woodpile where I'd left Sarah. I raised my rifle, calculating the risk. A shot would give away my position, but I couldn't let him reach her. Before I could decide, Sarah's voice rang out, startling me. "I don't care what they say." She had emerged from hiding and stood in the cabin doorway, my pistol steady in her hands. "I'm not your property, James." Rutherford's laugh was cold. "The law disagrees, my dear, as does the Bible. If you recall your wedding vows, to love, honor, and obey, you forfeited any right to my obedience the first time you raised your hand to me." She replied, her voice unwavering. "I'd rather die here, free, than live another day under your roof." "That can be arranged." Rutherford nodded to his remaining gunman, who leveled his rifle at Sarah. I didn't think, just acted. Bursting from cover, I fired, striking the gunman in the shoulder. He went down with a cry, his shot going wild in the same motion. I tackled Rutherford, driving him into the snow. Rutherford was stronger than he looked, fighting with the desperation of a man unaccustomed to losing. We rolled across the ground, each struggling for dominance. His fist connected with my wounded side, sending a bolt of agony through me. I gasped, momentarily stunned, and he seized the advantage, pinning me with a knee to my chest. "Savage," he spat, drawing a small derringer from his coat. "She belongs to me. Everything I touch belongs to me." "Not anymore." Sarah's voice came from behind him, cold as the mountain air. My pistol pressed against the back of his head. "Drop it, James." His hand trembled with rage. The derringer still pointed at my heart. "You wouldn't dare." "I've endured 3 years of hell because I couldn't dare," she replied. "I'm done being afraid." For a moment, no one moved. Then Rutherford slowly lowered his weapon. "You're making a terrible mistake, Sarah. Where will you go?" "Who will take in a woman who's abandoned her husband? You'll be ostracized, penniless." "She'll be with me," I said, shoving him off and rising to my feet. "And we'll manage just fine." The look that passed between Sarah and me held more than relief. It held promise, possibility, a future neither of us had dared imagine. "This isn't over," Rutherford snarled, his cultured veneer cracking. "I have connections. The law is on my side." "Perhaps," said a new voice. Hank stepped from the shadows, rifle in hand, alongside the town marshal. "But out here, we tend to favor justice over law when the two don't align." Marshal Jenkins looked uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. Rutherford, I've received telegrams from Pittsburgh inquiring about certain irregularities in your business dealings. Seems your hasty departure raised some questions." Rutherford paled visibly. "Those accusations are baseless." "Maybe so," Jenkins cut in. "But you'll have the opportunity to address them properly, in court, back east." As Hank and the marshal led Rutherford and his wounded man away, Sarah lowered the pistol, her hands finally beginning to shake. I moved to her side, gently taking the weapon. "You held steady when it counted." "I had something worth fighting for," she said simply, her eyes meeting mine. In that moment, surrounded by the vast wilderness and the quiet aftermath of violence, something unspoken passed between us, recognition that we had each found in the other something we hadn't known we were seeking. Hank returned alone, an hour later. "Marshall's taking them to Deadwood. That Rutherford fellow's in a heap of trouble. Seems he emptied company accounts before coming after his wife. His partners are none too happy." "He won't be back?" Sarah asked, her voice small despite her earlier bravery. "Not for a long while, if ever," Hank assured her. "Those financial crimes, they stick. Rich men hate nothing more than other rich men stealing their money." After Hank left, Sarah and I sat in silence before the rekindled fire. The night's events hung between us, changing everything and nothing. "What happens now?" she finally asked. I studied her face in the firelight, the fading bruises, the determined set of her jaw, the question in her eyes. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what you want." "I want—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I want to stop running. I want to build something that's mine, something no one can take away." I nodded slowly. "This land's got room for building." Her eyes held mine, searching. "Is there room for me?" The question stripped away pretense, laid bare the truth we'd been circling for weeks. I reached across the space between us, my calloused hand covering her smaller one. "There's always been room for you," I said. I just didn't know it until now. Spring came early to the Black Hills that year. By April, green was returning to the valley, and with it, a sense of renewal neither Sarah nor I had dared hope for. Word reached us through Hank that Rutherford had indeed been returned to Pittsburgh to face charges of financial impropriety, his empire crumbling in his absence as partners and creditors circled. "They're saying he'll be ruined," Hank reported, accepting a cup of coffee from Sarah on his weekly visit. "Might even see the inside of a prison cell." "And the charges he threatened against Hope?" Sarah asked, her hand unconsciously finding my shoulder as she stood beside my chair. "Dropped. Marshal Jenkins made it clear to the territorial judge what kind of man Rutherford really was. The judge has daughters of his own." Hank's eyes crinkled. "Besides, folks around here have taken quite a shine to you. Mrs. Donahue, the way you've helped with doctoring since Doc Miller took ill." Sarah had indeed become something of a local healer, applying knowledge gleaned from both her Virginian childhood and my Lakota remedies. People who might have shunned her as a runaway wife instead sought her skills, bringing everything from fevers to broken bones to our door. "I'm no doctor," she demurred. "You're what we've got," Hank replied simply. "And you're good at it." After he left, Sarah and I walked the property together, surveying the changes a season had brought. The cabin roof had been repaired, the garden plot turned and planted, new fence posts marking expanded grazing land, small changes that represented something larger: permanence, intention, future. "I received a letter yesterday," Sarah said, as we paused by the creek where willows were budding, "from my cousin in Philadelphia." I felt a tightening in my chest. "You thinking of heading east?" She shook her head, reaching for my hand. "Quite the opposite. She's informed me that under Pennsylvania's recently passed Married Women's Property Act, I may have legal claim to assets I brought into my marriage with James. My father's pocket watch, my mother's jewelry, items of sentimental rather than monetary value. But yours by right," I finished. "Yes." She squeezed my fingers. "My cousin is pursuing the claim on my behalf. I needn't return." Relief washed through me. "And if you did need to go back," Sarah turned to face me fully, her eyes clear and direct, "then I would go, settle my affairs, and return here to you, if that's what you want." The question hung between us, simple yet monumental. In all my years of solitude, I'd convinced myself that isolation was safer, that connections meant vulnerability. Yet standing before this woman who had entered my life uninvited and transformed it completely, I recognized the lie I'd told myself. "I want you to stay," I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you're useful, though God knows you are, but because I'm better with you than without you." Something softened in her expression. "Is that a proposal, Hope Blackwood?" "It's a beginning," I replied, drawing her closer. "If you'll have it." Her answer came not in words, but in the way she leaned into me, her lips finding mine with certainty. When we finally parted, I pressed my forehead to hers. "People will talk," I warned. "A white woman with a half Lakota man." "Let them," she whispered. "I've lived my life according to others' expectations. I won't do it anymore." As we walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand, I felt a lightness I scarcely recognized. Not the absence of challenges, those would always come, but the knowledge that whatever arose, we would face it together. We married on a clear June morning beside the creek, where willows now hung heavy with green. No church would have us, a divorced woman and a half Lakota man, but we needed no official sanction. Hank stood as witness, alongside Swift Elk and his family from the nearby Lakota settlement, and 3 families from town whose children Sarah had tended through winter fevers. "By the customs of my mother's people," I said, wrapping a hand-woven blanket around both our shoulders, "and by the truth in our hearts, I take you as my wife." Sarah's eyes held mine, unflinching. "And I take you as my husband, before these witnesses and the open sky, until death parts us." We sealed our vows not with rings. Sarah had left her gold band behind when she fled Rutherford, but with silver armbands crafted by Swift Elk's wife, etched with symbols of protection and partnership. That evening, as guests departed and twilight settled over the land, Sarah and I stood on the porch of our expanded cabin. Construction had begun on a proper infirmary addition where she could treat patients without them traipsing through our living quarters. "I received a telegram from town today," I told her, arm around her waist, "from that newspaper editor in Cheyenne." Sarah looked up, curious. "The one who's been writing about tribal rights?" I nodded. "He wants to publish my account of serving as a Lakota scout for the Union, then returning to find my mother's people displaced. Says it might help readers understand the injustice of the reservation system." "Will you do it?" I considered the question. For years, I'd chosen silence, believing it's safer. But Sarah had taught me that silence solved nothing, that sometimes standing up meant speaking out. "I think I will," I decided. Not just about the Lakota, but about all of it. How this country treats anyone different, Indians, women, former slaves, how laws protect the powerful, not the right. Sarah smiled, leaning into my side. "My crusading husband." "Look who's talking," I countered. "The woman who's been teaching Mary Thompson's daughters to read against their father's wishes." "Education isn't just for boys," she said with the quiet determination I'd come to love, "and Tom Thompson will come around once his daughters help keep better accounts for his store." We fell silent, watching as the first stars appeared above the pines. In the distance, a wolf called, its voice echoing across the valley. "When I first saw you dragging that trunk through the mud," I said, "I thought you were just passing through. Never imagined you'd change everything." "Including you," she teased gently. "Especially me." I turned to face her. "I took you as a joke that first day, a city woman who wouldn't last a week in the wilderness. I stopped laughing when I realized you weren't going anywhere. And now?" Her eyes caught the last light of day, reflecting it back to me. "Now I'm thankful every day that you stayed, that you saw something in me worth standing beside." She reached up, her palm against my cheek. "We saved each other, Hope Blackwood, and we'll keep doing so, day by day." As night settled fully around us, we remained on the porch, 2 people who had found in each other not just shelter, but home. The road ahead would hold challenges. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight, and society's rules changed slowly. But we faced it together, no longer alone, no longer running. In the years that followed, our home became a waypoint for others seeking refuge, abused wives, displaced Lakota families, Chinese workers fleeing railroad violence. We couldn't change the whole world, but we could create a small corner where justice mattered more than custom, where humanity outweighed heritage. And when our daughter was born the following spring, we named her Liberty, for the freedom we'd fought for, the principle we lived by, and the future we continued to build, together, in the vast expanse of the American frontier, where the land itself seemed to both challenge and embrace those who dared to claim it. We find the deepest truths about human resilience. The wilderness has always been more than just a setting. It's a mirror reflecting our capacity to endure, to rebuild, and ultimately, to choose connection over isolation. Some wounds can only heal in the presence of another soul brave enough to witness them. When society's laws fail to protect the vulnerable, it falls to individuals to stand in the gap, creating spaces where justice flows like clear water through parched earth. The true measure of strength lies not in domination, but in the courage to extend a hand when both hearts still bear the scars of betrayal. Perhaps this is the frontier's most enduring lesson, that freedom isn't merely the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, the choice to build something that outlasts our individual stories, something that offers shelter to those who come after us, carrying their own burdens down dusty, uncertain roads. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing what resonated with you most. Subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage, redemption, and the enduring human spirit. Until next time, may you find both strength and tenderness on your own path forward.